Have you ever felt like you were only called up because there was no one else left? Like you were the last name on the list, the backup to the backup, the one everyone overlooks until there's no other option? If you've ever been the last choice, the forgotten card in the deck, this story is for you. And if you know someone quietly waiting for their chance, share this with them, because sometimes it's the last bet that changes everything. The hangar was washed in the pale red glow of emergency lights, shadows stretching across the polished concrete. It was just before midnight when the radio crackled to life, the commander's voice tense and urgent. "We need a pilot. Now. Anyone available?" The best of Top Gun were gone that night, some out on a mission, others deep in night training, too grounded after a rough abort earlier in the evening. One by one, the names were crossed off the list until only one remained dot in the far corner of the ready room. Lieutenant Olivia Nova Vasquez sat on her duffel bag, boots unlaced, helmet resting at her side. She was new to the squadron, fresh from advanced training, known for her flawless simulator scores, but still waiting for a real chance to prove herself. To most, she was just the backup, the last choice. The operations chief burst in, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the room. "Vasquez, you're on alert, right?" She stood, surprised. "Yes, sir. Gear up. We've got an emergency. You're the only one left." Her heart hammered in her chest. She'd heard stories of midnight scrambles, but never imagined her first real call would come like this, by default. It wasn't the debut she dreamed of, but it was the only one she'd get. She sprinted down the corridor, helmet under her arm, flight suit barely zipped. The night air on the flight line was cold, thick with the scent of jet fuel and anticipation. A mechanic was waiting by the FSA-18, already fueled and gleaming under the floodlights. "They say it's just a routine intercept," he said, handing her the checklist. But if it was routine, they wouldn't be sending the last person on the list. Nova climbed into the cockpit, hands moving through the preflight almost automatically. Her mind raced with doubts. Am I really ready for this? But her training took over. She closed the canopy, the world shrinking to the glow of her instruments and the sound of her own breathing. The tower's voice came through her headset, clipped and businesslike. "Vasquez, cleared for takeoff. Good luck." The runway stretched. Out before her, a ribbon of light in the darkness. Nova pushed the throttle forward, felt the jet surge beneath her, and in a heartbeat, she was airborne. The base fell away, replaced by the endless black of the night sky and the steady hum of the engine. She checked her mission brief. One last time. Unidentified aircraft approaching the edge of their airspace. No response to hails, possible navigation. Error or something worse. Her job was to intercept, identify, and report. No engagement unless ordered dot as she climbed through the clouds. Nova remembered all the times she'd been told she was too good in the sim, not proven in the real. Ding. The looks from the other pilots, the quiet doubts, the time she'd been passed over. Tonight, there was no one else. Just her in the sky. Her radar pinged contact. 20 miles out, closing fast. She adjusted course, switched to intercept mode, and tried to raise the unknown on the radio. "Unidentified aircraft, this is Top Gun. State your intentions." No response. She tried again, voice steady despite the tension in her chest. Still nothing. The blip on her screen drew closer, low and fast, moving erratically. She flicked on her targeting systems, fingers hovering over the controls. Protocol said to keep her distance, but something about the flight path didn't add up. The aircraft was weaving, altitude fluctuating, almost as if the pilot was lost or fighting the controls dot at 5 miles. She finally caught sight of the other plane, a small civilian jet, flying dangerously low. Nova eased closer, using her lights to signal. The radio crackled, and a panicked voice broke through. "This is Alpha November 3. Electrical failure, lost all instruments, I can't see a thing. Nova's training kicked in. Alpha November 3. This is Top Gun. I've got you. Stay on my wing. I'll guide you in. She could hear the fear in the other pilot's voice. I don't know if I can hold it. I'm losing altitude, can't see the runway. Nova kept her own voice calm and clear, talking the pilot through every turn, every adjustment. The storm clouds were building to the north, lightning flickering on the horizon. Twice, the civilian jet wobbled, nearly losing control. Nova stayed. Right there, her jet a steady beacon in the darkness. Trust me, she said, over and over. We're almost there. The runway lights appeared, a string of hope in the night. Nova kept her jet alongside the civilian until the wheels touched down, guiding the pilot all the way to a safe stop. Only then did she request clearance to land herself. When she climbed out of the cockpit, the air was thick with silence. A few officers stood on the tarmac, watching in disbelief. The commander approached, face unreadable. You saved a life tonight, Vasquez, and you just made Top Gun history. Nova stood there, breathless, the weight of the night settling on her shoulders. She had been the last choice. But tonight, that was exactly what the world needed done, and from that moment on, no one ever forgot the midnight landing. The adrenaline that had carried Nova through the midnight landing faded as she stood on the tarmac, her hands still trembling from the intensity of the flight. The civilian pilot was quickly surrounded by medics and base personnel, his face pale, but his eyes wide with gratitude. Nova watched as he was led away, then turned her attention to the gathering crowd of officers and ground crew. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, as if on cue, a ripple of applause broke out, quiet at first, then growing as word spread of what had happened in the night sky. Nova felt her cheeks flush. She wasn't used to the spotlight. She'd spent her whole career as the backup, the one who filled in when others couldn't, the name everyone remembered only when the favorites were gone. Now, she was the center of attention, and it felt both exhilarating and terrifying. The commander approached, his expression unreadable. He looked her up and down, then nodded once. You kept your head, Lieutenant. That's what we need out. There. He clapped her on the shoulder, then moved on, leaving Nova standing alone in the cold, the echo of his words ringing in her ears. She made her way back to the ready room, the adrenaline slowly giving way to exhaustion. Her hands shook as she peeled off her gloves and helmet, her mind replaying every moment of the flight, the radio silence, the erratic blip on the radar, the desperate voice of the civilian pilot, the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. She wondered what would have happened if she hadn't been there, if she'd hesitated, if she'd let her own doubts get the better of her. Nova barely slept that night. She lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant rumble of thunder as the storm finally broke over the base. She thought about the flight, about the choices she'd made, about the strange twist of fate that had put her in the cockpit when no one else was available. She wondered if the other pilots would have done the same, if they would have kept their nerve, if they would have been able to guide the civilian down through the darkness. The next morning, Nova woke to the sound of rain tapping against the window. She dressed quickly, her mind still clouded by the events of the night before. As she walked to the mess hall, she felt the eyes of the other pilots on her, some curious, some skeptical, some openly impressed. She kept her head down, not wanting to draw attention, but it was impossible to ignore the whispers that followed her at breakfast. Rooster slid onto the bench across from her, his tray piled high with eggs and toast. He grinned, his eyes sparkling with mischief. Heard you made quite an entrance last night, Nova. Not bad for the last pick. Nova rolled her eyes, but couldn't help smiling. I just did my job. Got lucky. That's all. Rooster shook his head. Luck had nothing to do with it. You kept that guy alive. That's more than most could say. Hangman sauntered over, coffee in hand, a smirk on his face. Careful, Vasquez. Save too many lives and they'll start expecting it from you. Nova laughed, feeling some of the tension melt away. For the first time since joining the squadron, she felt like she belonged. The rest of the day passed in a blur of debriefings and paperwork. Nova was called in to recount every detail of the flight, her decision-making process, her communication with the civilian pilot, her handling of the storm and the emergency landing. The brass listened intently, nodding along, occasionally jotting down notes. When she finished, the commander leaned back in his chair, studying her for a long moment. You showed composure under pressure, Lieutenant. That's what we look for in Top Gun. Don't let this be your last moment. Nova nodded, her heart pounding. She left the room feeling both relieved and anxious, knowing that her performance would be scrutinized, that her every move from now on would be watched more closely than ever. As the days passed, Nova found herself pulled deeper into the life of the squadron. She flew more missions, trained with the others, and began to earn their respect, not just as the backup, but as a pilot in her own right. She still felt the weight of being the last choice, but now it was different. It wasn't a mark of shame, but a badge of survival. She had been given a chance, and she was determined not to waste it. One evening, as the sun set over the base, Nova sat on the wing of her jet, watching the sky turn from gold to deep blue. Rooster joined her, tossing her a bottle of water. You? No, I heard the brass is talking about putting you up for a commendation, he said, leaning back against the fuselage. Nova shook her head. I don't need a medal, I just want to fly. Rooster grinned. That's why you deserve it. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the hum of the bass fading into the background. Nova thought about how much had changed in just a few days, how she'd gone from invisible to indispensable, from the last choice to the one everyone was talking about. But she knew it wouldn't last forever. The next mission could be even harder. The next challenge, even greater. She would have to prove herself again and again, not just to the squadron, but to herself. Late that night, Nova lay awake, listening to the wind rattling the windows. She thought about the civilian pilot, about the fear in his voice, about the trust he'd placed in her. She wondered if he was safe, if he'd made it home to his family, if he'd ever know the name of the pilot who guided him through the darkness. She promised herself that she would never forget what it felt like to be the last choice. She would carry that with her, use it as fuel, as motivation to keep pushing, to keep flying, to keep proving that sometimes the last pick is exactly the person you need when the night is darkest. And somewhere, deep inside, Nova knew that her midnight landing was just the beginning of her story. Nova's days began to blur together, each one marked by early morning drills, hours in the simulator, and long flights over the endless blue. The memory of her midnight landing lingered in the hangar, whispered about in the mess hall, and referenced in briefings. Some of the older pilots nodded to her with newfound respect. Others, especially those who'd been passed over that night, watched her with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The squadron was busier than ever. The base was on high alert after a string of near incursions along the coast. Nova found herself flying more patrols, often paired with Rooster or Phoenix, sometimes even with Hangman, who had taken a grudging interest in her progress. She still felt like she was catching up, always a step behind the veterans, but every flight brought more confidence. One afternoon, after a grueling training sortie, Nova returned to the ready room to find a group gathered around a laptop. Someone had pulled up the radar logs and the TC recordings from her midnight mission. The room quieted as she entered, and for a moment, she hesitated at the door. Phoenix looked up and grinned. Come on, Nova. You've got to hear this. Nova listened as her calm, steady voice echoed through the speakers, guiding the terrified civilian pilot through the storm and down to safety. She heard the tremor in the man's voice, The way she'd kept him focused, the steady instructions she'd given even as lightning flashed outside her own canopy. When the recording ended, there was a brief silence. Then Hangman, arms crossed, gave a single nod. "Not bad, Vasquez. Not bad at all." Nova managed to smile, but inside she felt exposed. It was one thing to fly the mission. It was another to have it dissected by her peers. She slipped away as soon as she could, needing a moment alone. Outside, the sky was heavy with clouds, the wind whipping across the tarmac. Nova walked the length of the flight line, letting the noise and bustle of the base fade behind her. She stopped at the end of the runway, staring out at the horizon, the place where earth and sky met in a line of infinite possibility. She thought about her family back home, about her father's stories of flying crop dusters over endless fields, about her mother's quiet strength. She thought about the night she'd been called up, the feeling of being the last choice, the fear and the exhilaration of guiding another soul to safety. She wondered if she'd ever feel that kind of certainty. Again, the next week brought new challenges. The squadron was tasked with a series of complex night exercises, simulating hostile encounters and emergency landings on unfamiliar strips. Nova was determined to prove that her midnight landing hadn't been a fluke. She studied every map, memorized every procedure, and spent extra hours in the simulator, running through scenarios until her fingers ached. During the first exercise, Nova was paired with Hangman. The mission was simple on paper: intercept an enemy aircraft, identify, and escort it to a safe landing. But nothing in Top Gun was ever simple. The instructors threw in surprise weather changes, radio failures, and simulated engine trouble. As they climbed into their jets, Hangman shot her a sideways glance. "You ready to show us that wasn't just beginner's luck?" Nova tightened her gloves, meeting his gaze. "Watch me." The exercise started smoothly. Nova picked up the target on radar, coordinated with Hangman, and moved into position. But as they closed in, the instructors threw a curveball, a sudden engine fire, warning in her cockpit. Nova's training kicked in. She ran through the emergency checklist, radioed Hangman for support, and executed a textbook emergency descent. The instructors later praised her composure, noting how she'd kept her cool and worked with her wingman to bring both jets home safely. Hangman, never one to give praise lightly, clapped her on the back as they walked off the flight line. "Not bad, rookie. You're making us look good." But not every flight went perfectly. On a foggy morning patrol, Nova misjudged the turn-in. Low visibility and drifted dangerously close to restricted airspace. The controller's voice was sharp in her headset, and she felt the sting of embarrassment as she corrected course. Back on the ground, the debrief was tough. The commander reminded her that one mistake could have international consequences. Nova spent that night replaying the flight in her mind, second-guessing every decision. She worried that she'd let the squadron down, that the respect she'd earned was slipping away. She called her mother, hoping for comfort. Her mother listened quietly, then said, "You're not defined by one mistake, Olivia. You're defined by how you come back from it. Keep flying." The words stuck with her. Nova doubled down on her training, seeking feedback from the instructors and her fellow pilots. She asked Rooster to run through instrument approaches with her after hours, and he obliged, pushing her to trust her instincts and her training. As the days passed, Nova's confidence returned. She found herself stepping up during briefings, offering insights and suggestions, even challenging them more. Experienced pilots when she saw a better way. The squadron began to rely on her, not just as a backup, but as a pilot who could be counted on when things got tough. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the commander called Nova into his office. He gestured for her to sit, then studied her for a long moment. "You've come a long way, Vasquez," he said. "You're not the last choice anymore. You're here because you belong. Nova felt a surge of pride, mixed with relief. She thanked him, promising to keep earning her place. That night, Nova stood on the wing of her jet, watching the stars emerge one by one. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, more nights when she'd feel like the odds were stacked against her. But she also knew that she was ready. Her midnight landing had marked the beginning of her legend. Now, every flight, every mission, every choice was a chance to prove that sometimes the person everyone overlooks is exactly the one you need when the world goes dark. And as the wind swept across the flight line, Nova smiled, ready for whatever came next. Nova's reputation had shifted. She was no longer just a backup. She was a pilot the squadron trusted when the weather turned or the mission got complicated. But with respect came expectation and the pressure of living up to her midnight. Legend weighed on her more than she admitted. Every morning, she felt it in the way the commander looked at her during briefings, in the subtle glances exchanged by the veterans, and in the way Rooster and Phoenix now asked for her opinion before every sortie. The base was on edge. There were rumors of an enemy squadron testing the perimeter, probing for weaknesses. The tension was a living thing. Everyone sensed the coming storm, but no one knew when or where it would break. Nova found herself flying long patrols, sometimes in silence, sometimes with Rooster or Hangman for company. The sky felt different. Now, as if it were holding its breath. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling training flight, Nova was summoned to the commander's office. She walked in, still in her flight suit, boots caked with dust. The commander was at his desk. A satellite map spread before him, red markers indicating recent enemy sightings. He gestured for her to sit. "We have credible intel that the enemy is planning a night incursion. They're going to try to slip a pair of fast jets through our radar net. We need someone to intercept, identify, and, if necessary, force them down before they reach the coastline." Nova's heart raced. "You want me to lead the intercept?" He nodded. "You've proven you can handle the dark. I want you and Rooster in the air tonight. Hangman and Phoenix will be on standby." Nova left the office with her mind spinning. She found Rooster in the ready room, going over flight plans. He looked up, saw her expression, and grinned. "Let me guess. We're on the graveyard shift." She nodded, sitting beside him. "This one's different. They're expecting trouble." Rooster's grin faded. "You ready?" Nova hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I am." They spent the afternoon prepping their jets, running through checklists, and reviewing every scrap of intel. As dusk fell, the base grew quiet. The ground. Crew moved with a sense of purpose, checking and rechecking every bolt and fuel line. Nova could feel the weight of the mission settling on her shoulders. She slipped away for a moment, standing at the edge of the runway, watching the last light fade from the sky. She thought of her midnight landing, of the fear and the focus, of the way she'd found her way through the dark. She whispered a promise to herself. "No matter what happens, I'll bring us home." The call came just after midnight. Nova and Rooster suited up, helmets in hand, boots echoing on the concrete as they walked to their jets. The mechanics gave them thumbs up. The commander offered a silent nod. Nova climbed into her cockpit, the familiar ritual of straps and switches, grounding her as the adrenaline surged. The tower cleared them for takeoff. Nova taxied to the end of the runway, Rooster close behind. She took a deep breath, pushed the throttle forward, and felt the jet leap into the night sky. The world below vanished in darkness. The only light came from the instrument panel and the faint glow of Rooster's jet off her wing. They flew low, radar silent, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. Minutes stretched into an hour. The radio was quiet except for the occasional check-in. Nova's mind wandered, replaying every lesson, every warning, every bit of advice she'd ever been given. She forced herself to focus, to trust her training. Suddenly, a radar pinned 2 contacts, low and fast, coming in from the northeast. Nova tightened her grip on the stick. "Rooster, I've got them." 2 bogies, bearing 045, 20 miles out. Rooster's voice was calm. "Copy. I'm with you." They adjusted course, closing the distance. Nova tried to hail the unknown jets on the emergency frequency. "Unidentified aircraft. This is Top Gun. You are entering restricted airspace. Identify immediately." No response. The contacts kept coming, weaving through the valleys, using the terrain to mask their approach. Nova's heart pounded. She signaled Rooster to spread out, to cover both flanks. At 10 miles, the enemy jets broke radio silence. A harsh, accented voice crackled through the static. "This is Falcon 1. We are on a training flight. No hostile intent." Nova didn't buy it. Their flight path was too deliberate, too aggressive. She kept her distance, matching their maneuvers, watching for any sign of weapons. Rooster's voice was tense. "Nova, they're not acting like trainers," Nova agreed. "Stay sharp." The enemy jets suddenly accelerated, breaking formation and diving toward the coastline. Nova reacted instantly, rolling into a pursuit, Rooster on her wing. The chase was on. The night sky became a blur of speed and adrenaline. Nova pushed her jet to the limit, closing the gap, her eyes locked on the lead enemy. She called out over the radio, "Turn back now or you will be engaged." The enemy ignored her, banking hard and dropping altitude. Nova saw the coastline ahead, the lights of the base twinkling in the distance. She had seconds to act. She armed her weapons, locked onto the lead jet, and fired a warning flare across its nose. The enemy pilot jerked away, startled, but kept going. Rooster was right behind the second jet, matching every move. "Nova, they're not stopping." Nova made a split-second decision. She rolled her jet, coming up alongside the lead enemy, her wingtips almost touching. She flashed her landing lights, signaling for the pilot to break off. For a moment, she saw the other pilot's face, eyes wide with surprise. The enemy jet wavered, then peeled away, climbing hard and turning back toward open water. The second jet hesitated, then followed. Nova and Rooster stayed on their tails, escorting them out of restricted airspace. Only when the radar showed both contacts retreating did Nova allow herself to breathe. They circled back, flying low and slow, the adrenaline draining away. Rooster's voice was quiet. "Nice flying, Nova. You saved the base." Nova smiled, exhaustion washing over her. "We did it together." They landed just before dawn, the base still and silent. The commander met them on the tarmac, his face unreadable. He listened to their report, then nodded once. "You made the right call. You kept your cool, and you kept us safe." Nova stood there, helmet in hand, watching the sun rise over the runway. She felt the weight of the night lift, replaced by a quiet pride. She had led the intercept. She had made the call. And she had brought them home. As the squadron gathered around her, Nova realized something had changed. She was no longer the last choice. She was a leader, a pilot trusted with the hardest missions, the one they looked to when the night was darkest. And as the new day began, Nova knew her legend was just beginning. Nova's world changed after the night intercept. She'd proven herself not just as a skilled pilot, but as someone who could lead, make split-second decisions, and bring her team home. The squadron's respect was no longer tinged with surprise. It was real, hard-earned, and complete. Even Hangman, who once called her rookie with a smirk, now offered a nod of acknowledgement when they crossed paths. But with respect came responsibility. The commander began assigning Nova to more complex missions, coordinating multi-jet patrols, running joint drills with visiting squadrons, and even briefing the base's senior officers on her tactics. She found herself in the thick of every new challenge, her days packed with flight hours and her nights with debriefs and planning sessions. One afternoon, as she was reviewing flight plans in the ready room, the base's emergency klaxon blared. Pilots scrambled, grabbing helmets and flight bags, racing for the hangar. Nova's heart pounded as she reached her jet. The commander's voice came over the radio, tense and urgent. All available pilots, scramble. We have a Mayday coalition. Transport down. Enemy movement detected. Nova, you have lead. She barely had time to process the order before she was in the air. Rooster and Phoenix on her wings. Hangman close behind. The radio crackled with reports. A transport carrying wounded soldiers and vital supplies had been forced down in hostile territory, just beyond the coastal ridge. Enemy vehicles were closing in, and the survivors were pinned down. Nova's mind raced. The terrain was rough, steep cliffs, dense forest, and only a narrow valley leading to the crash site. Enemy anti-air batteries were rumored to be hidden in the hills. The rescue window was closing fast. She opened the squadron channel. We're going in low and fast. Hangman, Phoenix, suppress any ground fire. Rooster, with me. We'll cover the evac. The jet screamed over the ridge, hugging the contours of the land. Nova's eyes scanned the ground, searching for the telltale glint of enemy armor. Tracer fire arced up from the trees. Phoenix and Hangman responded with pinpoint strikes, clearing a path. Nova spotted the downed transport, a smoldering hulk, surrounded by a makeshift perimeter. A handful of soldiers waved frantically, signaling with flares. Enemy trucks were closing in from two sides. Rooster, on my mark, smoke, run. Nova called. They dropped smoke grenades, blanketing the valley. In a thick, white fog, under cover, a pair of rescue helicopters swooped in, their rotors chopping the air. Nova and Rooster circled above, laying down suppressive fire, their jets weaving through the chaos. Suddenly, Nova's radar lit up an enemy SAM site powering up on the far ridge. She had seconds to react. Hangman, Phoenix, SAM at 2 o'clock. High ridge, she shouted, but the site fired before they could strike. A missile streaked toward the lead helicopter. Nova's instincts took over. She dove, flares streaming from her wingtips, cutting between the missile and the chopper. The missile locked onto her jet, and for a split second, she felt the world narrow to a single point of light. She pulled every trick she knew, rolling, diving, dumping speed. The missile followed, relentless. At the last moment, she popped a final flare and yanked the stick hard. The missile exploded in a blossom of fire just behind her. Nova's jet shuddered, alarms blaring. She fought the controls, coaxing the wounded aircraft back into level flight. Below, the helicopters lifted off with the rescued soldiers, racing for safety. Nova, you good? Rooster's voice was tight with worry. She checked her panels, hydraulics damaged, warning lights everywhere. But she was still flying. I'm hit, but I'm coming home. The squadron formed up around her, escorting her back across the ridge. The base was ready-fire crews, medics, and a crowd of pilots and ground crew watching as Nova brought her crippled jet in for a landing. She touched down hard, the jet skidding, smoke pouring from the fuselage. The emergency crew swarmed, pulling her from the cockpit. Nova staggered out, helmet in hand, her flight suit streaked with soot and sweat. The commander met her on the tarmac, his face a mix of relief and awe. You saved them all, Lieutenant. And you brought yourself back. Nova managed a tired smile. I had help. That night, as the adrenaline faded, Nova sat alone in the quiet of the hangar. The base was safe, the rescued soldiers were recovering, and her squadron was celebrating another impossible mission pulled off by the pilot, who was once just the last choice. But Nova couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She'd faced death, not just for herself but for others, and made it back. She thought about the missile, the narrow escape, the trust her team had placed in her. She realized that her legend wasn't just about one midnight landing. It was about every decision, every risk, every time she refused to let fear win dot as she gazed at the stars through the open hangar doors. Nova felt a new sense of purpose. She was no longer flying to prove herself. She was flying for her team, for the people on the ground, for everyone who needed someone to lead when the night was darkest dot and as the base settled into sleep. Nova knew that the story of the last choice was far from over. She was ready for whatever the sky would throw at her next. Nova's hands still carried the phantom ache of the controls, her body remembering every jolt and shudder from the battered jet. The rescue mission had been a success, every life saved, every pilot returned, but the cost lingered in her bones and haunted her dreams. Each night, she replayed the missile's approach, the flash of heat, the split second where instinct and training had been all that stood between her and oblivion. The squadron celebrated her courage. The commander commended her in front of the entire base, and even the most seasoned pilots treated her with a new, unguarded respect. But Nova felt a strange distance from the praise. She smiled, nodded, and joined the laughter. But inside she was restless, her mind turning over what-ifs and close calls. She began to notice the small things, how her hands trembled just a little before each flight, how her heart raced at the sound of the scramble alarm, how she lingered longer in the cockpit after landing, savoring the silence before stepping back into the noise of the world. She told herself it was normal, that every pilot carried scars, visible or not. But the next challenge came sooner than she expected. Word spread that a visiting squadron from another allied base would be arriving for joint exercises. These pilots were famous for their aggressive tactics and razor-sharp flying. The commander saw an opportunity, not just to test the squadron, but to see if Nova's leadership could stand up to outside scrutiny. He called her into his office, the door closed, the air heavy with expectation. "I want you to lead the joint drills, Vasquez. Show them how we do things here. You'll have full authority over the flight plan and tactics." Nova blinked. "Sir, are you sure? There are more senior pilots." He cut her off with a wave. "You've earned it. They'll follow you. And if they don't, make them." She left the office with a mix of pride and anxiety. The squadron congratulated her, but she could sense the undercurrent. Some were excited, others wary. Hangman, always the provocateur, grinned. "Don't let the hotshots walk all over us, Nova." The visiting pilots arrived with swagger and confidence, their jets gleaming, their patches bristling with campaign ribbons. The first briefing was tense, the room thick with bravado. Nova laid out her plan, a series of complex maneuvers through the coastal canyons, simulating both offensive and defensive scenarios. She spoke with clarity and conviction, her voice steady even as she felt the weight of every eye in the room. The drills began at dawn. Nova led the first flight, Rooster and Phoenix on her wings, two visiting aces trailing close behind. The air was alive with competition, each maneuver sharper, each turn tighter than the last. Nova pushed her team hard, refusing to yield an inch. The visiting squadron tried to outflank her, using tricks and aggressive dives, but Nova anticipated every move. She called audibles over the radio, shifting formations, baiting the enemy into traps, then springing her own. The local pilots rallied around her, their trust in her leadership growing with every pass. But the pressure mounted. On the third sortie, a visiting pilot broke protocol, diving dangerously close to Nova's jet in a mock dogfight. The move was reckless, and for a heartbeat, Nova's old fear surged. Her hands tightened on the stick. Her mind flashed back to the missile, the heat, the chaos. She forced herself to breathe, to focus, to trust her training. She rolled out of the dive, looped behind the aggressor, and tagged him with a simulated missile lock. The radio crackled with surprise and grudging admiration. Back on the ground, the visiting pilots were subdued, their bravado tempered by respect. The commander gathered everyone in the hangar, his voice carrying over the hum of engines and laughter. That's how we do it here. Teamwork, discipline, and the best damn flying on the coast. Well done, Lieutenant Vasquez. Nova smiled, the tension easing from her shoulders. But that night, as she sat alone in the ready room, she felt the old doubts creep in. She wondered if she'd been lucky, if the next mission would be the one where luck ran out. She was startled by a knock at the door. Rooster stepped in, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You did good today," he said, sitting beside her. "You kept us together, even when things got hairy." Nova looked at him, searching for any hint of doubt or resentment. She found none. "I keep thinking about that missile," she admitted quietly. "How close it came, how close I came to losing it up there." Rooster nodded. "We all have those moments. But you didn't freeze. You led. That's what matters." They sat in silence, the hum of the bass fading into the night. Nova realized that leadership wasn't about never feeling fear. It was about what you did with it. About showing up. Again and again. Even when the world seemed determined to test you. The next morning, Nova led another flight. This time with both squadrons mixed together. The drills went smoothly. The tension replaced by camaraderie and shared purpose. By the end of the week, the visiting pilots were asking her advice, eager to learn her tactics, her instincts, her approach to flying in the dark. The commander called her into his office one last time. "You've done more than prove yourself. Vasquez, you've raised the bar for everyone here. The next time someone calls you the last choice, remind them what happens when you put the right person in the right seat." Nova left the office with her head held high, a new sense of confidence settling in her bones. She knew the doubts would return, that the sky would always hold new challenges. But she also knew she was ready as the sun set over the base. Nova walked the flight line, her shadow stretching long across the tarmac. She paused by her jet, running her hand along the scarred fuselage, remembering every flight, every risk, every moment she'd refused to give up. She was no longer just the last choice. She was a leader, a legend in the making, and the sky was hers. The base was quieter than usual. The visiting squadron had departed, leaving behind a trail of stories and a new respect for Nova and her team. The mood was lighter, but beneath the surface, a subtle tension lingered. The commander had been called into classified meetings, and rumors swirled of a high-level threat brewing far beyond their coastal perimeter. Nova was in the simulator late one evening, running through complex night intercepts when the alert klaxon shattered the calm. She bolted upright, heart pounding, and sprinted to the ready room. The squadron was already assembling, faces tense, eyes scanning the monitors as intelligence streamed in. A coalition reconnaissance plane had gone down deep in contested airspace. The pilot, Calcine Echo, had managed to eject, but his last transmission was a Mayday enemy patrols converging, a rescue window measured in minutes. The brass needed a team to fly a covert extraction, and they needed it now. The commander's gaze swept the room and landed on Nova. "You have the most night ops experience. Your lead, Rooster, Hangman, Phoenix, gear up. You launch in 10. Nova felt a jolt of adrenaline and fear. This was no exercise. This was the kind of mission that could go wrong in 100 ways. She nodded, her voice steady. "Copy that, sir." The team moved with practiced urgency, each pilot running through their rituals, checking gear, reviewing maps, sharing a look that said everything words couldn't. As Nova climbed into her jet, she caught Rooster's eye. He gave her a thumbs up, his confidence in her absolute. They launched into the night, flying low and fast, hugging the terrain to avoid radar. The world outside was a blur of darkness and shifting shadows. Nova's mind was sharp, her senses attuned to every flicker on the screen. Every whisper in her headset died as they neared the crash site. Enemy searchlights swept the hills. Nova led the team in a wide arc, using the valleys for cover. Phoenix picked up Echo's locator beacon, a faint pulsing signal. Hangman scanned for enemy patrols, his voice tense. "We've got movement, 2 clicks north. Looks like a search team." Nova made the call. "Rooster, Phoenix, hold high and provide overwatch. Hangman with me low and slow." They crept in, engines throttled back, eyes straining for any sign of Echo. The beacon grew stronger, then suddenly cut out. Nova's heart skipped. "Echo, this is Nova. Do you copy?" A burst of static, then a weak voice. "Nova, I'm here. Woods." "Enemy close?" Nova scanned the ground, searching for movement. She spotted a faint glimmer, an emergency strobe, half buried under the trees. Enemy vehicles were closing, in headlights sweeping the forest. She made a snap decision. "Hangman, lay down smoke along the ridge. I'm going in." Hangman's jet roared overhead, releasing a volley of smoke canisters that blanketed the area in thick, swirling fog. Nova dropped her jet into a steep approach, landing on a narrow stretch of abandoned road. The moment her wheels touched, she was out of the cockpit, sprinting into the trees. The world shrank to the sound of her own breathing, the crunch of twigs underfoot, the distant shouts of enemy soldiers. She found Echo huddled behind a fallen log, blood on his arm, eyes wide with relief. "Can you walk?" She whispered. He nodded, grimacing in pain. Nova slung his arm over her shoulder and half carried, half dragged him back toward the jet. Bullets cracked through the trees, enemy voices shouting in the dark. Nova didn't look back. They reached the jet as enemy vehicles burst onto the road. Nova shoved Echo into the back seat, slammed the canopy shut, and gunned the engines. Bullets pinged off the fuselage as she roared down the road, the jet barely clearing the treetops as she pulled up. Rooster's voice crackled in her headset. "You got him?" Nova's breath was ragged. "We're out, heading home." The enemy gave chase, but the squadron formed up around Nova, their jets weaving and diving to draw fire. Phoenix took out an enemy truck with a precision missile. Hammond strafed the road, and Rooster covered Nova's 6 as they raced for friendly airspace. They crossed the border just as the first light of dawn touched the horizon. The base erupted in cheers as Nova landed, Echo safe but shaken, the jet riddled with bullet holes. The commander met her on the tarmac, eyes shining with pride. "That was impossible, Lieutenant, and you made it look easy." Nova shook her head, exhaustion and relief mingling in her chest. "It was anything but easy, sir." Echo was rushed to the medics, and the squadron gathered around Nova, their respect now absolute. Hammond clapped her on the back, Phoenix hugged her, and Rooster simply said, "You're a legend, Nova." But as the adrenaline faded, Nova felt something deeper, a quiet, unshakable certainty. She had faced the darkness, risked everything for another pilot, and brought him home. She had led her team through chaos, not with bravado, but with calm, relentless resolve. That night, alone in the hangar, Nova ran her hand over the bullet holes in her jet. She thought about what it meant to be the last choice, about the journey that had brought her here. She realized that her legend wasn't just about skill or luck or even courage. It was about never giving up on herself or on anyone else, no matter how impossible the odds dot. As the sun rose over the base, Nova knew she was ready for whatever came next, not because she was fearless, but because she had learned to fly through fear and to lead others through it too. The base was waking to a new day, but for Nova, it felt like the end of a long, dark night. She stood on the tarmac, the early sun glinting off her jet's battered fuselage, the scars of the rescue mission still fresh. Around her, the squadron was gathering: Rooster, Phoenix, Hangman, the ground crew, even the commander. There was a hush in the air, a sense that something had shifted, not just in the squadron, but in all of them. Nova watched as Echo, the rescued pilot, limped across the tarmac, his arm in a sling, a grateful smile on his face. He stopped in front of her, saluted, and said, "You didn't just save me. You reminded me what it means to never give up." The commander called the squadron to attention. He spoke of courage, of leadership, of the difference between flying for yourself and flying for those who count on you. Then he turned to Nova, his voice carrying across the flight line. "Lieutenant Vasquez, you were once the last choice. Now, you're the first name we trust when the night is darkest. You've shown us all that legends aren't born. They're made, one impossible decision at a time." The squadron broke into applause. Nova felt her heart swell, not with pride, but with gratitude. She looked at her team, at the faces that had once doubted her, and saw only respect and camaraderie. That evening, as the sun set over the base, Nova found herself alone by her jet, the sky painted in gold and purple. Rooster joined her, leaning against the wing. "You know," he said, "they'll tell this story for years. The night you landed in the storm, the rescue in the woods, how you turned being the last choice into a legend." Nova smiled. "Maybe, but I hope what they really remember is that I never did it alone." Rooster grinned. "That's why you're the leader we needed." Nova looked up at the sky, the first stars appearing. She thought of every doubt, every setback, every time she'd felt invisible. She realized that her journey wasn't about proving everyone wrong. It was about proving to herself that she could rise. Again and again, no matter how many times she was counted out. The next morning, a new roster was posted. Nova's name was at the top. She suited up, helmet under her arm, and walked to her jet. The squadron fell in behind her, a team united not by rank or reputation, but by trust earned in the crucible of adversity. As Nova climbed into the cockpit, she felt a quiet certainty. She was ready for whatever the sky would bring, not because she was fearless, but because she'd learned that courage is simply flying forward, even when you're scared, even when you're the last choice. And as her jet thundered down the runway, lifting into the dawn, Nova knew her story was just beginning. If you've ever been overlooked, doubted, or made to feel like you were someone's last choice, let Nova's journey remind you. Sometimes that's exactly what the world needs. Sometimes the last choice becomes the legend. If this story inspired you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more true tales of courage, resilience, and the unexpected heroes among us, subscribe and join us for the next adventure, because the next legend could be you.